Hola chicos, hoy vamos a hablar del pretérito, de otros verbos irregulares. Nosotros ya hablamos de muchos tipos de verbos irregulares y hoy vamos a hablar de los verbos de UV verbs, another set of preterite tense irregular verbs. So, ¿qué son estos verbos? Primero, hay tres verbos que tenemos que saber para los UV verbs. Y los verbos que nosotros vamos a aprender son andar, tener y estar. So, solo hay tres verbos que tenemos que memorizar. Now, first thing, most important thing, you need to know what these verbs mean. So, ¿qué significa el verbo andar en inglés? Andar en inglés. To walk. Now I have a live studio audience, sophomores, just so that you know, and they're not saying anything right now. So, andar, ¿qué quiere decir andar? To walk. So my class says to walk. One person said to help. We won't mention who that was, but it is to walk. Andar es un verbo muy común. So we got to know what it means first. Add it to your vocab list if you don't know it. ¿Qué quiere decir el verbo tener en inglés? Uno, dos, tres. Did you hear that? It means to have. So el verbo tener, to have. Un verbo muy común. Y el verbo estar, there are two verbs for this in Spanish. This one has to do with place, position, location, action, condition, and emotion. And this verb means? To be. To be. Muy bien. El verbo estar quiere decir to be. Bueno. Entonces, estos son los tres verbos que estamos estudiando aquí. These are all irregular. Well, how are they irregular? These are UV verbs, and we know that these verbs in the preterite tense change in their root, or the stem of the verb changes, and then they take their irregular endings. So what is the root, then, of the verb andar and tener and estar if they have this UV in it? Liam has his hand up. He's going to take a guess. What do you think the root is, Liam, of the verb andar? Well, yep, the root on its own is and, if you were to just conjugate it regularly. Now, what if it was a UV verb? What two letters do you think you might add to and to make it a UV verb? Liam's thinking. He says he doesn't know. Anduv. It's a UV verb. We are adding a UV onto the stem. So the root of this verb in the preterite tense is anduv. That means when you conjugate this verb, you have to start with this root, anduv. Okay? Now this verb is kind of nice because you just cut the AR off and you add your UV and done. The other verb that also does that in the same way is this verb, the verb estar. So if we cut this AR off and we add our UV, we are left with what for a root, everybody? Estuv, which sounds kind of funny, and that is the root of the verb estar. And we add our endings onto that. Okay? To have is a little different. It is not tenuv. I repeat, it is not tenuv. We need to cut off this whole ending here. The tener, it just becomes a UV verb from the T, which means it is? My studio audience says tuv, and they are correct. Okay? So here are roots of these verbs. All right? So, what are some ways that we can use these verbs? We know, you guys have these written down already, my studio audience, and we know that our endings in the preterite tense are irregular endings. We have a whole set of endings. You've already written them down. Iste, o, imos, istes, hieron. So let's ask my studio audience some questions. How would you say then, studio audience, if we know that these are our endings? Let's talk about the yo form. How would you say, studio audience, I walked? Uno, dos, tres, go. Anduve. And you heard the studio audience say, hopefully, anduve. This one word means I walked. And of course, you can add a lot more information to that. All right, studio audience, if you wanted to say, for example, I was, as in I was somewhere for a period of time. Position, location, action, condition, emotion. You want to use I was, you're using the verb estar. How would you say I was? Uno, dos, tres. Estuve. And if you heard my studio audience, they said estuve, and that was right. Now, this is tricky because I was, you're going to use various different, obviously the verb ser, the verb estar, And also, you're going to use the imperfect tense for this sometimes. So you really have to be careful with this, and we'll talk about it more as we practice with it in class. All right, there's one more verb, and the verb is tener. Now, tener, we know, means, in English, to have. In the preterite tense, the verb tener also means to get or to receive. So, like, if you say that, I went to the restaurant and I got the chicken, I had the chicken, I got the chicken, you would use the verb tener. So how would you say I had, I got, or I received? And uno, dos, tres. Yo tuve. Okay, this means I had, means I got, I received. The verb tener has a lot of different meanings in the preterite tense. So these are our 3 irregular UV verbs in the preterite tense. I will now ask my studio audience, because I don't very often have one, if there are any questions. Hunter is asking a question. You can't see him, but he's asking a question. Hunter, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you ever, use accents.
Hunter's wondering if you ever use accents. I don't know if you could hear that question. And the answer is you do not use accents on your irregular endings. Your irregular endings are also called unstressed endings. Unstressed. It means they don't have accents. Remember, though, Hunter, and maybe other people would benefit from this review, that you have 3 sets of endings in the preterite tense. Many of you guys have taken this down 8,000 times, and if that's the case, please don't take them down again, but just pay attention and go through them. For your regular verbs, you have 2 sets of endings. AR verbs are a, aste, o, amos, astes. Aaron, by the way, if this is a review for you, the screencast is about to go over 7 minutes, so you can stop here. If it's not, keep watching for sure. ER and IR verbs. What are your ER and IR verbs endings, guys? What's your yo form ER and IR ending? What's the yo form? Yell it out in 1, 2, 3. E. And the to form? Iste. ¿Eres usted? Yo. Imos? I'm sorry, I just said it. Imos. Vosotros? Istes. ¿Ellos ustedes? Yeron. So here's your 2 sets of regular endings. Your unstressed endings, I'm not going to bother writing them down again because they are, boom, right here. Notice the difference. Maybe I should write them again to just notice the difference. Over here, you have no accents. They're unstressed. These are irregular. Every irregular verb that we've talked about has these endings. A, iste, o, imos, istes, hieron. That's the long-winded answer to Hunter's question about accents. Are there any other questions from my B-Block studio audience made up of non-sophomores for this screencast? Muy bien. This was an experiment. We'll see how it goes.
Tim has a question.
Tim, yeah. Tim does not have a question. All right. We'll stop right here. Muchas gracias por su atención. B-Block studio audience will now say adios on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.